All right, let's get into it. There we go. All right, so let me share a story about a bad decision I've made. While I'm telling you this story, think about a decision you've made, because a lot of our framework for decision making is based on where we've been burned versus where we've been successful. And it's good to reflect back, right? So let's set the stage. I created a new platform team a few years ago. I was at Spotify, and we were gifted, like emphasis on gifted, a good amount of code from our peer teams, as most platform teams end up doing. They end up getting the things that most teams just don't want to deal with, or should be quote unquote platformized in whatever way that these teams have envisioned. And for example, in this particular instance, one of the services and frameworks and libraries that we were gifted were a bunch of code bases that filtered content in so many ways, in so many locations in the system architecture. So our first goal as a new platform team, emphasis on new, was to consolidate the filtering logic into one shared framework. And to give a little bit of context, I'm sure we understand this, but just to provide some context, this filtering logic has product requirements, business requirements, legal requirements. It's quite important. Like, if it's not working, there's an incident. So this is like tier 1, P1, this shit matters. And so our first goal was to consolidate it so that we would have a shared framework, right? So it would be easy to update, to contribute to, just put it in one place instead of 10 different places. So the team was taking a while to make a decision as to how we could create a singular shared framework for filtering. So I made a decision on one casual Monday morning to write a doc. I'm pretty good at writing docs, so this is no big deal. I just wrote a doc, said, hey, let's consolidate it all into a backend service. Keep in mind, we inherited this backend service. It was already introduced into the request path, so I wasn't introducing a new service into the production ecosystem. And I was like, let's put it all in there. Patience is not one of my virtues. I wanted us to move slightly faster. I just wanted us to put it all in one place, and so that we can jump to the next thing on our roadmap. And also, this is a new team, so I wanted us to get a good win early on, right? And here's a very illustrative diagram of the clients making a request to the backend service instead of through a library or so. No biggie, right? This is not a big deal. It's so great they have a manager that cares so much and writes docs, right? No, the way I went about this decision was really, really bad. So keep in mind, this team was a brand new team, and there's an aspect of brand new teams of how do we make decisions? What's our ways of working? I vividly recall a one-on-one with one of the most tenured engineers on the team, and they were like, so this is how we go about decisions? We just write a doc and put your name on it? I was like, yeah, that's exactly how we go about decisions. And it's not, though. It's absolutely not for this team. This team, it's definitely more consensus-driven. There was a lot of emotion. I mean, I felt like I spent so many one-on-ones talking about this damn decision. Anyway, so long story short, this decision for this particular team at this particular time was wrong. And it wasn't about the technical merit. Keep in mind, again, the backend service was already in the production ecosystem. There was a social cost that I paid because of the way I went about that decision, right? Years later, I still think about this decision, unfortunately. This is all to say, making a good decision is so contextual. It's influenced by who, when, where, and how. And in this talk, we want to help you with your strategy for making impactful decisions as leaders of projects and teams. I'm Leemay, Senior Engineering Manager at Spotify and author of Practical A/B Testing.
And I'm Emily. I'm a Senior Staff Engineer at Spotify. And I want to talk with you all about some of the different types of decisions that we make in our day-to-day. Leemay and I put together this bubble chart. It's illustrating just some of the types of decisions that we make. The dark blue are decisions that typically management makes. The light blue are typically decisions that staff plus engineers make. And the red are the decisions that we share. I want to highlight some of the staff plus decisions here. Things like tech debt and future-proofing, reliability and infra cost, and patching versus refactoring. I think one thing that's interesting about some of the decisions that we make as staff plus engineers is that they're often trade-offs of each other. We have to think about, should our team take on more tech debt, or should we spend the time future-proofing our system? Do we want to make our systems more reliable? But that comes at a cost. If an incident occurs, do we want to patch that incident and move on, or do we want to spend time refactoring our systems? These are things that staff engineers have to weigh the pros and cons for and think about what makes sense in that particular moment.
Thanks, Emily. So from the management standpoint, many of our decisions are made to influence the overarching goal of serving the company's vision and mission, right? So we're making many decisions that influence each other. So for example, the staffing decisions that I make influence the team culture. And then the team culture influences our roadmap and productivity. And then naturally, how productive we are enables us to meet the priorities or accomplish the priorities that the company sets for us, right? Or we set together. And so in other words, I'm saying everything I do is for the team development. Like, is my team healthy? Do we have the right culture on the team? And that's all important because it's enabling the product and engineering strategy. Let's talk about making hard decisions. Some decisions are much harder to make. Let's go through some case studies and how we navigated them. All right, hard decision number 1, promoting a high potential individual despite skepticism. So years ago, I really believed in a particular individual. They were up for promotion for staff, or I put them up for promotion for staff. And I believed in them. I knew they had the domain expertise, the technical prowess, the emotional empathy. When something didn't go as they expected it to go and it caused another team pain in other ways, there was remorse. I believe they had all the traits to be a staff engineer. However, clearly there's a key word in here, skepticism. My peers were skeptical. My peers saw a different side of this individual. They knew that they were highly skilled from a domain perspective and technical perspective, but they didn't see the empathy and the emotional capacity that I saw. They saw someone that was a little bit harder to work with, was a little bit more bold, had edges. And the reason this is a hard decision is because it's a lot easier to just say, we'll promote them next year. We'll just do it next year, no biggie. Actually, no, that is a biggie. It's a biggie for a couple of reasons. 1, it's not good for that individual. 2, what's best for the company? For the company, I believed it's better to promote this person because if you picked up this person and put them anywhere else in the company, I knew they'd be successful. So I want them to stay. I don't want them to churn or leave the company. So the challenge here with this hard decision is to first address the skepticism, so that's a tactic that you should use, while focusing on the potential and qualities of the individual being promoted. Emphasize the good, but also emphasize, I know these are the areas you're concerned with, and I'm going to take accountability and coach them through it. So if something bad happens, I coach them through it. If something great happens, I emphasize the heck out of it. Give your peers the confidence that you're investing in this person for whatever reasons. Don't just take the easy way and just say, we'll just do it next year. All right, hard decision number 2, committing to a controversial product feature or system engineering change despite many, many objections. We've all been here on a long enough timeline. You believe in a feature on the product or you believe on a system architecture design change that your peers just don't. And if you haven't experienced this, that's amazing. Because this is really painful when you believe in something and you're I want to see this out the door. So how to address this hard decision? So first, address the reasoning for the objection, while also painting an alternative view. Words are so powerful. Words are persuasion, right? Writing is persuasion. The better you are at writing, the better you are at persuading folks with your ideas. So what I'm saying here is write and speak the words to convince them that it's going to be okay. Let me try this out. So ask questions like, what's the cost of trying something with the least amount of engineering effort? What's that cost? I guarantee you it's going to be silence. They're not going to have an answer to that. Or ask them a question like, what would you want me to do instead? It's my engineering team. It's my engineering org. I highly doubt they're going to have a reason or something that you should work on alternatively. And if they do, great. That can influence you in a different direction. So create a document to gain alignment. Define clear metrics for what success looks like. Make sure that's clear. Time box the investment. Say, I'm going to spend 6 months on this. Let me run. And of course, A/B test it, A/B test everything, especially because you can get data. Well, A/B test everything that makes sense. All right?
One hard decision that I've had to make is how to design, build, and then drive adoption for a critical data set. The first tactic that I took here was to prototype the design with mock data, and I used that to get feedback. I showed it to a few key stakeholders. They gave me some feedback on the schema, things I could tweak with the design, so that I could iterate on it before the build phase. Then once this data set was built, I had to think through, how do you drive adoption across multiple teams in your company? And the tactic that I took here was that I had a lot of one-on-one meetings with folks. I did group presentations. I did write-ups just explaining what this data set was, why it was important. And then the next step that I took was I would influence key leaders to set adoption goals, like OKRs, so that their teams could actually prioritize integrating this data into their systems. Another hard decision that I've had to make is making company-wide decisions on what technologies folks should use. At my company, I lead, it's a cross-company group of data experts, and one of the things that we do is make decisions around what technologies folks should use when working with data. So things like what processing engine folks should use, what orchestration layer, what languages, etc. So the first tactic when making this decision is just making sure that the right people are in the room to weigh in on this decision. So what I did was looked at the different departments at my company and then looked at the data activity in each of those departments. So looked at the number of data endpoints that gets created, the number of data pipelines, and then from there allocated seats to each of those departments. I worked with the leads of those departments and had them nominate folks to represent them in this group. That way we'd have the right folks in the room to weigh in on these key important decisions. Then once we had made decisions, we had to be extremely transparent and very clear when communicating what our decisions were. We wrote up a one-pager. So first, the transparency portion, I telegraphed every moment, every kind of step in our decision-making process so that there would be no surprises when the decision was actually made. Then once we made the decision, we wrote up a one-pager and tried to be very clear and concise about what the decision was and why. We had an extensive FAQ section trying to anticipate as many questions as we could, and had some one-on-ones with key individuals trying to address any of their concerns in the moment. And now let's talk about some red flags to consider. Things that, when you're making a decision, make you take a beat, take a moment and think, am I really going down the right path here? First red flag that I've come across a few times is jumping to a complex solution first when solving a problem. I've seen this often come up in recommender systems. Folks often want to jump to a very complex machine learning model to solve a problem, when oftentimes a heuristic or a simple ML model could be a good first step. I think the thing to think through here is there a more iterative path that you can take to get to your goal? Taking these smaller steps can help set your team up for success. I've seen often when you kind of jump to a more complex solution, there can be a higher maintenance burden on your team. You can wind up with more incidents, more alerts, and it can also be really hard to debug that complex system. So I think it's important to think about, is there some smaller steps that you can take to get to your goal? Another red flag is deciding on what a team should work on and also how they should work on it. I encountered this in my career when I was working with about 3 or 4 teams, and we had had a lot of incidents recently. So I decided that we should pause our product work and focus on paying down tech debt for a little while. But then I also told the teams how they should pay down that tech debt, and I got a lot of pushback from them. I think the thing to think through here is to help your team understand what they should build, but then empower them to decide how they can build it. This helps teams have more autonomy, feel more ownership over their systems, and then also feel more control of their own destiny.
Thanks, Emily. All right, so I'll hit up red flags indicating need for action, like action right now. Red flag number 1. You're in a project, there's some key initiative you're building out, and engineers are rewriting similar documents throughout the project. You could be like, yeah, that's such a simple statement, like that's not that big a deal. Actually, it really is. I've been in this situation where one engineer writes an RFC, illustrates, this is how we're gonna do something, and then like a month later, another engineer writes something very, very similar. This is an indicator that the project needs like organization. It needs a lead engineer. If nobody's a lead engineer, guess what? You're probably the lead engineer because there's 5 other people making different decisions and someone's gonna have to decide. So this is a red flag that suggests that something needs to change, whether it's introduce a lead engineer, introduce a project manager, or add organization yourself as a leader. Red flag number 2, team members aren't using the correct terminology when describing specific domain constructs. This one drives me insane. It makes me feel like you don't really understand what's happening, and when you don't understand what's happening, I get nervous about what's going into production. I'm one of those managers. This indicates a lack of understanding. To me, if someone's referencing Bigtable, but then they're saying they're actually using BigQuery, that's like quite frightening, because they're used in different use cases, right? Or if they're talking about an experimentation concept and they're using one word, but really they mean nothing, they mean like something about like a monitored rollout. Very different use cases, right? The decision that you need to make when this happens is either establish some knowledge sharing, like you yourself do the knowledge sharing, or have the engineers pair with a more senior engineer who's more familiar with it. This mitigates implementation risks. I've been there where engineers are moving in one direction and what's pushed into prod is like not exactly what you had planned. Red flag number 3, a team closes off their support Slack channel. I'm living this one right now, and adds a workflow for tickets to be created when support is needed. So I can't even jump in the channel. I have to create a ticket to ask a question. This is totally normal for like IT support or for teams that have that support the entire company. It's a red flag when it's a small team that supports like 5, 6, 7, even like 8. Like I think this is an indicator of something else. And your job as the leader is to figure out, why does the team feel so overwhelmed that they have to close their Slack channel? It's time to revisit their system ownership, potentially reorg, or add additional headcount to balance the load. And this is not the team's fault. Like they're reacting, they're doing something to make their lives better. You have to really understand and analyze like what's going on, how can I fix this, and then open up the Slack channel. All right, so we're gonna pivot to deciding versus being informed. The most important thing we do as leads is make decisions. That's why Emily and I are giving this talk. But sometimes it's better to just be informed or slightly influenced. I love being informed. In management, our world is people, right? Do we have the right individuals to build out our engineering and product strategy? Again, everything I do, everything I think about is, do I have the right people in the right place at the right time, et cetera? And so in relation to whether I should own a technical decision or technical project versus be informed, this is my decision tree. So the first question I ask myself is, do I have a lead engineer or EM to own the project? Happy path, yes. Great, they own the decision as the lead of the project. I'm informed or I influence in whatever ways we figure out. Via one-on-ones, I join the status meetings, whatever, I read the documents. This is great, I love this. Let's say I don't have a lead engineer as Emily, a very legit engineer, or an EM to own the project, then I'm the lead. And that's totally fine, I'm still technical, like I can still make decisions. But at the same time, when this happens, what else am I not doing as a result? And can I delegate that? That's like super, super important. If I can delegate it, then great, I can continue being the lead of the project or initiative, but eventually I should delegate the opportunity to someone else, because I am a manager of managers, or I manage a team directly. Like there are things that I do that engineers can't do, like staffing decisions, cultural decisions, budget, all that fun stuff. And again, if I don't have someone to delegate to, then I need to find a lead soon so my other responsibilities aren't left to the wayside.
So for me, from the staff plus kind of perspective, when thinking through a decision needs to be made, who should be making the decision? I think you can ask yourself a series of questions, weigh the pros and cons, and then think through who should decide. One thing you can ask yourself, kind of similar to what Leemay was saying, can you delegate this decision? Can somebody else make it? And if they can, then it gives yourself the space to work on other things, and you can empower others. So then your team could decide. If you can't delegate the decision, you wind up with having more control over the decision, but possibly less buy-in, and you could just make the call. Another thing to ask yourself is there a tight timeline? If there is, the first thing I encourage you to do is to push back on this timeline and give yourself some more breathing room.
I hate this one. As a manager, I hate this one, but keep going, Emily.
So sometimes you're not always successful in getting more time. So in that case, you might wind up with a less rigorous decision-making process, but you wind up moving faster so you can just decide. But if you have some more breathing room, you might be able to give yourself some more buy-in when making the decision and have the team decide. Another thing to think through is, do you need to build buy-in with this decision? If you do, people can feel more included and heard, but you'll wind up with a slower decision-making process. And in that case, the team can decide. If you don't really need to build buy-in at this point, you can move faster, and you can just decide. Another thing to think through is, do you need to quickly unblock the team? Is your team stuck? If they are, you can move faster, but probably build less buy-in, and you can just make the call. But if you don't need to quickly unblock them, you can take your time, get more buy-in, and the team could decide. And then another thing you could think through is, do you need more input? Is there other folks that you want to weigh in on this? If yes, you might wind up with a slower decision-making process, but you'll probably get more targeted and relevant feedback. And so your team, and then maybe even some other key stakeholders could help decide. But if not, you could move faster and just make the call. So when thinking through who should make a decision, who should decide, you can ask yourself these 5 questions, weigh the pros and cons, and think through what makes sense in your situation. And now I want to talk through some frameworks for decision-making, because sometimes you might need a more formal decision-making process. I want to talk again about that cross-company group of data experts that I lead. When we met, we knew we were going to have to be making important decisions around what technologies folks should use when working with data. And so we decided that we needed a more formal decision-making process. A little bit more context about that group. It's made up of 16 folks, so it's a relatively large group. We are volunteers on this job, so we work only a couple of hours a week together. And most of the people hadn't worked together before, or some of them hadn't even met each other before. So when we got together, we decided that we wanted to have a formal process for making decisions, and we decided to go with a consensus-based model. In this case, we decided that everybody should have a say. We didn't want any kind of majority-based rules types of votes. So if one person voted no in a decision, then it wouldn't go through. The way that it works is somebody can submit a proposal to the group, we all vote, and then if one person votes no, we take the proposal back, we can tweak it, submit it to the group again, and kind of go through this process until everybody agrees. But we realized that sometimes we might be stuck in an infinite loop in this case, and so in those cases, I as the lead would make the call. Having this formal decision-making process has helped make the group feel more confident in these very important cross-company decisions. One other thing to think about when making decisions is to cultivate your inner circle. I think it's really important to find experts in different disciplines than your own that you can go to and ask for advice. So there's people that I go to and ask about backend or machine learning or mobile engineering. And I use these folks to bounce ideas off of in a low-stakes setting before bringing my decision to a wider audience. And now some final takeaways as we close out this talk. Your decisions reflect your culture and your values. So think about this when making decisions around things like reorgs or promotions. Think about what message does this send to the people in your org.
Thanks, Emily. You can also roll back decisions. Changing a decision is a powerful demonstration of effective and principled leadership. Think about the past. How often has a leader said they reflected on something they made a decision about and they need to revert the decision? That's never happens. I remember a few years ago, we did this exercise in Slack in our leads channel where we searched if anyone said, I messed up, oops, oh, F, or something. Like some words that suggested that like, hey, I'm taking accountability, I didn't make the right decision, like we need to change it. And it doesn't need to be used in that type of words, but rolling back a decision is very powerful and it's also very admirable.
Sometimes there is no right or wrong answer when making a decision. If you think back to that bubble chart that I showed you all at the beginning, a lot of decisions that Staff Plus engineers make are often just trade-offs of each other, and there may not really be a right or wrong answer. It's just very contextual, and you have to think about what makes sense in that moment.
When you can, explain why you're making the decision. There will be cases where you can't explain, i.e. legal, HR-related, performance improvement plan-related, so take advantage of the situations where you can be transparent. It will build trust and make up for the situations where you can't explain your decision.
And finally, hindsight is 20/20. You will never have all of the information that you want to make the perfect decision. All we can do is just make the best decision that we can with the information that we have at hand. And the best way to get better at making decisions is to just keep making them, practice, learn from your mistakes and your experiences. Thank you.
Thanks.